everyone. As you're coming in, thank you for attending today. The purpose of this panel that we hold once a year is to help students understand opportunities outside of academia. The panel is sponsored by both the Department of Sociology and Criminology, as well as the Criminal Justice Research Center. And we usually in the past have brought in people that are at high levels in government or high levels in their career, for like executive directors or someone that's been doing research for 10 years. But when I was sitting down to organize the panel for this year, I realized that a lot of their experiences on the job market and how they made the decision to go non-academic might not be as relevant for students now who are deciding whether or not to get just a master's, to get a PhD, what you can do with the PhD, accept academia, and what that job market looks like. So I specifically reached out to 3 Penn Staters. So we have our, a host of our own here today who have chosen to go the non-academic route. So you might know these people personally, depending on when you came into the program. So we have Theodore Greenfelder here, who worked closely with the center itself and then took a position here in State College. Well, first he worked at the Division of Criminal Justice Services in Albany, New York, and then came back here to take a position as a research analyst at data analyst at PCS. We also have Rory Managhan with us. Rory's a very recent graduate. He also had a seed grant through the center for some summer funding with PCS to do some policy research, and took a position with the National Center of State Courts. And then finally, we have Julia. I'm going to mispronounce your last name. I'm so sorry. Laskorunsky. Is that close? She wants to help me. No, she's not going to help me. Okay. Julia, who works at the research institution, the Robina Institute, which is at the University of Minnesota. And I know I personally quote a lot of the Robina Institute work in my academic publications. It's very policy relevant for anything in criminal justice. So we're going to give each panelist about 15 minutes to talk about their experiences on the job market, why they decided to go that way, kind of what typical duties are like for a non-academic job. And then after all 3 have spoken, we're going to have a Q&A where you're able to enter questions through the chat function, and we will provide those questions to the panelists. Julia, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Julia Laskorunsky. I am a research scholar at the University of Minnesota Law School, and I work for a small research institute. We're called the Robina Institute of Criminal Law and Criminal Justice. I would categorize my position as being academic adjacent. I do work for a university, obviously. However, I am not tenure track faculty. I do not teach classes. My job, I graduated in 2017, so I am about 5 years out. I finished about 5 years with Robina this past summer. So, and I've been there the entire time. So what I do on a daily basis, we are what you would call soft money funded. And I think that's, if you're interested in work like this, that's probably a term everybody should get familiar with. If you are looking for a non-academic position, there are soft money positions and there are hard money positions, and there is a difference. So what that means for me is essentially my job exists based on the grant funding that comes in every single year. So if there are no grants for a particular year, there is a little bit of money that the university can push my way to keep my position on. Obviously, they don't want me to leave, but I am kind of responsible for keeping my job afloat. And I do that by applying for grants that I want to work on. And and working on those and making sure that it fills up 100% of my time. So we have been fortunate, as most of you know, criminal justice is a really popular, hot, trendy, whatever area to that people have invested in. Governments, local and federal governments have pushed a lot of money to try to study criminal justice processes, criminal offending behavior, things like that. And also in the philanthropy space, there's a lot of money that has come into this field. I am almost 100% philanthropy funded and have been for about 5 years. We have applied for some government funding, but at least for my position. And so what the projects that we work with are almost entirely with agency partners. So if I have an idea for what I want to do with an agency, if I want to answer a particular question for them, I want to solve a particular problem, perhaps I have an idea for an intervention that I think would work. What I would do is I would try to go recruit an agency partner. And there's no there's no easy way to do this. You kind of just have to reach out to people you know, people you've worked with, people that you've worked with that have known other people. So it's very informal. And I can present a plan to them. And then I either go and try to seek funding for that plan, or I do it the opposite way. There is like an RFP, which is a request for proposals that comes out, and they want a specific question answered. And I have an idea for an agency that may want to take that on and have me evaluate it or whatever. And then I approach an agency that way. So that's typically what the projects look like. For me personally, when I was at Penn State, I was mainly focused on sentencing and the courts. I worked under Jeff Ulmer. I did a lot of work with sentencing guidelines. I worked with the Pennsylvania Commission on Sentencing. And so when I moved into Done Act space, I mainly worked with sentencing commissions to start. One of the first projects that I ever did was I examined the criminal history score for the Minnesota Sentencing Commission. And actually some of that work led to them revising how they calculate that score, which was very exciting. That was just something I was able to do, I think, within the first year or so of graduating. So it was just like a very satisfying thing to see that policy change. Since then, I've kind of moved away from that a little bit, and I focused a lot more on parole release research. I work with a lot of parole boards now. I've probably worked with about 6 different parole boards at this point. And I look a lot, I examine risk assessment, their use of risk assessment, their use of parole guidelines if they have them. I examine parole decision making. We also had a small project where we examined how individuals who are being evaluated for parole go through the parole release process, which actually involved going into prisons and interviewing people who were up for parole. So it is pretty varied. Most of my research is mixed methods. I'm a big believer in combining both quantitative and qualitative methods. I think that's where you get the true answers. I don't think looking at quantitative data in a vacuum really answers many of the big questions that need to be answered in criminal justice today. I don't think just going out and interviewing individuals or analyzing, qualitative data really does that as well. I think both together is really important. And so in terms of a typical day, I have a lot of flexibility. I am actually 100% remote. So I don't even live in Minnesota. I never have. I am in Raleigh, North Carolina, and have been here for the last 5 years. I work 100% from home. I get to design my day. For me, that essentially looks like I have some writing days where I pretty much just write, and I try not to take meetings, and I try not to do a lot of administrative work. And then there are days where I'm sending off, a million emails. I'm checking in on data analysis from the research assistants. I'm checking in to see if You know, an IRB has been approved. I'm checking in to see if, you know, a contract with a consultant has kind of been moved through the bureaucracy of So, and then I have a lot of meetings. I mean, I think that's, you really can't get away from that no matter what position you have. I meet with a lot of people, with agency partners. I meet a lot with other professors who I'm working with at the law school. I meet with obviously my team here at Robina. And so many of us are remote, so there is just a lot of Zoom meetings. I like it. I don't usually work more than 8 hours a day. You know, I have bad weeks like everybody else where I need to catch up on work, but for the most part, I work 40-hour weeks. Unless something, you know, there's a crazy deadline. I feel like I'm not rushed all the time. I think it's a pretty low stress job for me. It's interesting. I get to do a little bit of writing. I have time to read, catch up on the latest research. Most of the writing that I do is not academic, in the sense that I don't write a lot of journal articles. Most of the writing that I do is policy briefs. I do a lot of technical reports. I do a lot of presentations, so a lot of PowerPoints, a lot of visualizations, things like that. I prefer that. I've never been, frankly, a big fan of writing journal articles. I figured that out when I was in grad school. I don't find them to be particularly useful for practitioners or agencies. So it's not something I want to put a lot of time in. So if you are in grad school right now and you're kind of feeling like, hey, I don't particularly like this process where I don't like this style of writing, or I don't like writing journal articles where you send it off and then somebody you don't know gives you criticism about a topic that they also may not know about. That's okay. Like, don't feel like that is weird because it is the academic publishing process is frankly bizarre. Those articles are not read by practitioners for the most part. So, if you don't enjoy that type of writing, you may want to look into the ALDAC space, because while I do publish some academic articles, for the most part, my writing, I try to just make it as simple, as clear as possible. I want to reach a wide audience, essentially. So in terms of what my job market experience was like, I came into Penn State a little bit older. I already had some work experience. I worked for a small research institute in DC, also on criminal justice work. And so I kind of knew that this was a possibility for me. Frankly, I still, while going through my graduate program, I wasn't sure. You know, I went on the job market kind of thinking I would try both. And I just wasn't getting the type of interest from academic institutions that I would have liked. And I also, frankly, just had some very logistical concerns. When I was on the job market, I was newly married, and I had a husband that had a position in another state. So for me to then take on, you know, whatever position was given to me at whatever university would have meant like moving my whole family. And I just wasn't quite sure I wanted to do that. Frankly, I have some, I just have some concerns about, I still do have some concerns about just being, assuming that people who go through a graduate program are, you know, best served by working in the academy. I don't think that's always true. I think the academy, I think being on the job market, on the academic job market, is frankly kind of bizarre in that you have people that may have totally valid logistical concerns, like not wanting to live in a certain place or not wanting to make, you know, whatever, $70,000 a year. And for some reason, if you're on the academic job market, you're supposed to just take whatever you can get because like you're lucky to even land any sort of position. And that just never really resonated with me. I know plenty of people who are incredibly happy being professors. So it's just to say that that's not for everybody, and that's totally fine. I know a lot of people who are very happy in their non-academic careers. So there's a whole wide world out there. There are a ton of opportunities. I mean, this is not an area that's shrinking anytime soon. There are, you do kind of have to like look for the opportunities because it's just not as easy to understand exactly what that OutAct field looks like, especially when you're in grad school and all you're surrounded by is, academia. But it's out there. I promise you, you can make a very good salary. You can have a pretty low stress job. You can still do really high quality research. I mean, the research that I do uses every single skill that I've learned at Penn State. So I am sure I'm up to 15 minutes. So I will stop there.
I was just going to stop you.
Okay.
You had 1 minute left, but that's
okay.
That's good. And it's really nice to hear that there's so many opportunities. And also to say, I know a lot of our students say, well, how do I find a job if I want to go non-academic? And you do have to do some more searching on your own. So that might be something we talk about a little bit at the end, more in the Q&A on how and where to search if you're interested in that. I'm going to toss it over to Rory next and let you take center stage.
All right. So I'm Rory Managhan. I'm a research associate at the National Center for State Courts. So the National Center for State Courts is like where Julia works. It's a soft money institution. So most of them, it's a nonprofit. So most of the money comes through grants, though some of it is from states who contribute money yearly, annually. The budget is from a lot of different places, but primarily grants. So what the center does, so it does research, consulting, technical assistance to improve the phrase they use is the administration of justice, the efficiency and efficacy of the administration of justice, and for courts. So their focus, I know a lot of the courts research we do at Penn State and in academia more generally is focused on offender outcomes or people who are experiencing the courts, their outcomes. And while that is true of some of the stuff the center does, there's also a focus on the administrative side of courts. So court, how well they're handling their workload. There's even a division or a group of people who work on the physical structures of the courts, like engineering type of thing. So it's a lot more broader in its scope of the courts being a much bigger thing than just criminal outcomes. And it focuses on courts outside of criminal courts. So there's appellate courts, family courts, civil courts. It's everything that courts can be is what the National Center deals with the research and the consulting and technical assistance that we provide. There's also an international division. So it's a very involved and larger than I expected it to be organization that has its hands in a lot of aspects of courts. But because I came in with a criminology degree, a lot of the stuff I do is in the criminal justice side of the courts. And some of the stuff I do does focus on the courts. So because I'm really new to the job market, newer than the other two panelists, I think my reflection on the job market and my experience going through Penn State is a little fresher in my head and probably more or closer to what you guys are going through possibly right now. So I graduated from Penn State technically this past summer, but I finished up my dissertation and defended it in April and started working at the National Center in April. So coming up on a year, I've been working there. But at Penn State, I was focused on criminal justice research. I did some court stuff, law enforcement, but I knew criminal justice is where I'd want to be. And as Julia was saying, the criminal justice area right now in research does have a pretty big employment boom. And in the past 5 years, there's been a lot of things that have happened that inspire a lot of states, a lot of funding organizations to focus on criminal justice research and evaluations of criminal justice systems. So right now is probably as good as the job market's been in this area. So having that focus did lend itself to the job market. But early in my graduate experience, I knew I did not want to do academic research. I didn't want to be in academia for a variety of reasons, some of which Julia pointed out. I think the publication process is kind of bizarre, as she said. I think chiefly the reason was that the research always felt removed from the context that it was trying to assess. The data could be rich and great, but the context from which the data came is kind of murky. You don't really know what was going on at the courts or law enforcement, whatever. You just kind of feel removed from it. And then the impact that your research can make, again, it always felt kind of removed from where it was meant to be. It'd have to go through so many hoops and get to how many people's hands for it to actually have a tangible impact. So the ivory tower is kind of a cliche thing, but that it rang true to me. Not that academic research can't be impactful and can't be contextualized, but I felt a lot of it wasn't. In order to get to the point where it is, it does require a lot of grant writing and a lot of time and effort that graduate students rarely have the time to do. So I did feel early on, I sort of aimed what I was doing at trying to get into the non-academic job market. And as Megan kind of referenced, I did end up getting a grant with the PCS, and I did some work with them over a summer. And having that little thing on your resume really does help, saying even if it was this one was a tiny grant, but saying that you earned a grant does really look, it looks good to employers. But while I was working with the folks at the PCS, the two that I was working with were they were at one point in a similar position that I was. They were earning their PhD in a field they did not want to be in the academic part of, and with an interest in the criminal justice system. So one of them, Matt Kleiman, who I think is on this call, very generously sort of helped me navigate the job market. So I was lucky enough to have somebody who kind of walked me through the job market. We went over my resume together countless times, cover letters, all the steps in the job, the job search. He kind of helped me along, and I was very fortunate to have that. And I guess we can get into this after Megan kind of mentioned it as a question. I know most people don't have that. I was very fortunate to have that. Most people don't have someone walking them along, trying to navigate an area that this department necessarily isn't set up to help you succeed in. But eventually, after I applied to 4 or 5, the National Center, Matt used to work there, and he got a job posted. He sent me a job posting for the National Center for a Research Associate, and I submitted a resume and cover letter, and then I got an interview, and now I'm here 10 months later. So at the center on a day-to-day, it sounds quite similar to Julia's, except it isn't it's not associated with any academic institution. So it is a little more structured of a workday. Unfortunately, because it is soft money, I don't know if, Julia, you have this experience. We do have to log our time every day. So like a lawyer has to log every 15 minutes. We do have to log our 15 minutes on what we're working on because it is soft money. And the funders want to know, it's a pain, but it's a necessary thing that has to be done. But it is a structured, pretty structured workday, and the work. So I work remote, just as Julie, which I advocate for anyone who doesn't want to have to move. In the work that we all do can all be done remotely. You can travel if you need to travel, but I live in Philadelphia. It's a city of 1.5 million people with a vibrant culture. The national center is in Williamsburg, Virginia, which is historic Williamsburg, right? So a city that's growing versus a town that has people dress up like they're in colonial times and pretend they're in colonial times. I didn't want to move. So I made a point when I was interviewing that I want to be remote. And that is not a advantage that academic positions share. That's me kind of petitioning for everyone to go out. But not having to move to Williamsburg, having to uproot your life was a really nice aspect for this job. I did mention another nice little thing that's come with this job is being able to travel as much as I have. So I've only been here for 10 months, but I've done, and really the travel has only picked up for me in the past like 5, but I've gone to Colorado a few times for site visits for a project. I was just actually in Raleigh, North Carolina last week for another site visit, and a few more coming up, which is, if you like to, not everyone likes to travel, but it's a nice little thing. You have to work the whole day, you still get to see the different areas of the country. And I think more importantly, when you're traveling, you're on site visits. So you're one-on-one, you're getting face-to-face with the people, that context that I talked about earlier, getting context for the research that you're doing, for the data that you are handling. All of the site, every project we have has a client, and that client is a court, a specific court or a state court system, and their input is involved at every step of the research process. So formulating questions, best way to collect the data, understanding quirks in the data, and the results, they all have a part in this process, which I think is just as important as the research itself, as having the correct input with the research. So being able, every research project, having someone who can give you direct context and experience with what you are doing has, to me, the research that we do feels a lot more thorough than anything I could have done as a graduate student or early academic. Just because it's a necessary part of our research, and it's embedded in everything. And through this, I know courts aren't for everybody, but this could apply to any context. Through doing these site visits and meeting our clients face to face, I've really changed my perspective on the court system as a whole. It's been a really eye-opening experience to talk to people in the courts and understand just like the day-to-day work functions. It really puts research and data into its proper context. And that's been a really rewarding, and I think a empirically very important part of good research. I have a few things, John. Hold on. Oh, right. Another thing that I've enjoyed about working in the non-academic area is everything is a lot more collaborative, at least in my job experience. So you can have co-authors on a paper, and that's one thing, but these projects are a lot more involved and a lot bigger. So you have a whole team of people working on the research, and that does make for a different sort of workload that you have personally. You're doing things that you are good at, or maybe stepping into things you don't know, and it's sort of broken up, but it also allows a lot more perspectives to be pushed into the research that you're doing. So out of like the 10 people I work with regularly, I'd say, and I think just one of them is actually a Crim PhD. Everyone else has a PhD in psych, or they're an economist or public policy folks. So there's a lot more opinions, or a lot more different perspectives of research and what courts mean, and how courts, how to approach court research. It gives a lot more, instead of this monolith of how Crim folk people understand courts, it's a lot more diverse in contribution. And I think that also leads to a much richer research end product. I think you get a just like a more diverse and more holistic endpoint. I don't know how much time I have
You've
left,
got
so
a
I'll
minute
just
left.
1 minute. All right, so if you are close to getting your PhD and you're going on the job market, or you're looking for a job, actively applying, and you get an interview, but you don't have your PhD done, finish your degree first and foremost, because that little PhD that goes at the end of your name after the comma, or the doctor in front of your name, it means something symbolically to the people you will be working with. Even if it's just a matter of that something got signed, it does mean something to judges, attorneys, anyone you end up dealing with, client facing. Having your degree matters to those people, and not symbolically, tangibly, having the degree does open up your earning potentials more. So I was lucky enough to get 3 months between getting accepted for the position and the job start. So I was able to do my whole PhD or dissertation in 3 months. And that has made all the difference in future earnings and what it means when you're slapping your name on it. So if I give one little piece of advice, finish your degree, it'll help you.
Thank you, Rory. We have time for our last panelist here, Ted, who worked with the center, and many of you probably know, and is now at PCS. So I'd like you to talk about your experiences. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. Happy to be here. Coming in hot on the heels of Rory strongly suggesting you finish your degree. I actually have not finished my PhD yet. I've been a bit of an absent student in the Crim department for the last about a year and a half now. So I started the program in 2015, and then I completed my comps in April of 2020. So right as the pandemic was really starting to get off the ground. Which really colored a lot of my perspective about the job market, because I was starting to look for positions right when every academic institution was doing hiring freezes, and it looked like the academic job market was really shutting down, and it was going to be pretty uncertain for the next, what felt like, couple of years. So that's when I really started a strong look for a non-academic position. So going through graduate school, I would, like Julia said, I was kind of both minds. Like, do I want to do an academic route? Do I want to do the non-academic route? What is it about the non-academic route that sort of draws me to those positions? And then looking at how the academic markets were looking in 2020, sort of, I won't say forced my hand, but did make the decisions a little bit easier. So I ended up seeing a position listed for the Division of Criminal Justice Services in Albany, New York, for a research scientist role. And in that position, and in my current one, I think my roles have been a bit different than what Rory and Julia have experienced in the non-academic space, because they're, like they sort of both mentioned, they're in a bit of an alt academic space where they're still doing lots of research and writing. I have been in a more sort of hard money, more traditional office structure environment in both of those jobs. So I've had like a direct supervisor, and then a department head, and then our department is part of a larger organization where the sort of research directives are coming from a much more top-down approach. So in New York, the Division of Criminal Justice Services is an entire department in the government that is set up to be a clearinghouse for criminal justice data for the state of New York. So it has everything from starting at the arrest all the way through parole information. And here in Pennsylvania, I'm working for the Pennsylvania Commission on Sentencing, where we do a very similar thing. However, Pennsylvania's data funnel is a little more leaky than the state of New York. But here, I'm also part of a sort of legislatively mandated office that does evaluations on criminal justice proceedings in the state of Pennsylvania. So a project I'm on right now is for a project called Short Sentence Parole, where if someone has a minimum sentence date of under 2 years, they're eligible for presumptive parole, where when they hit their minimum date, they just are released on parole instead of going through the entire parole board interview process. So we're doing an evaluation of that program because the state has mandated that it needs to be evaluated, which means I'm interfacing with the Department of Corrections, and we're getting data from the appellate courts, sort of merging all that together and trying to create appropriate comparison groups, and then eventually doing sort of day savings analysis and cost benefit analysis and general recidivism outcomes for people that were in the program and not in the program. What that looks like for me is I'm doing a lot of data work. I would say doing much more data work than I do any sort of writing work. And now I've talked myself completely into this direction instead of giving really any more background about how I got here. But I'll just sort of back up to say that my day-to-day sort of looks much more like a sort of traditional office structure. So like both of my co-panelists, I am fully remote. I am employed by the Pennsylvania Sentencing Commission, which is sort of very strongly affiliated with Penn State, but is a separate organization. But I was able to get a fully remote role, so I live in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So I also have a sort of a 8 to 5 workday with an hour lunch, and when I clock in, I just sort of work through set of tasks that I've set up and agreed upon with my direct supervisor as we sort of chip away at these larger mandated projects. Lots of other things that I would have to say would mostly be echoes of what Rory and Julie have talked about. So to get into specifics about any of those things, I think maybe we could start answering questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Let me get my camera to go back on here. So one thing I want to say is your position is very different. The first two positions they talked about were soft money. I worked in that environment for a while where your job's dependent on grants, and there's some good things about that with freedom, but there's some bad things about that, whereas you're always seeking the money and not, your job's not as secure as the job that you have, Ted, where it's the hard money and you have a designated role within an organization, usually a state or government organization. So they are different environments. They both have benefits and drawbacks, just like academia does. So it's a matter of finding what fits for your personality. But I wanted to start off the Q&A while the questions start coming in. I see where you have two. But as a professor here at Penn State, I know that we do a lot. We do sample job talks and help our students a lot for the academic market. I was wondering if you could think back to when you were leaving Penn State. Is there something we could have offered to better prepare students for the non-academic market? And this is open to anyone. If you have any suggestions for us to take to heart for students that want to go that route. I know, Rory, you talked about Matt Kleiman at PCS helping you out, but what could we do as a department to better prepare our students that want to go in this direction? And that's open to any of the panelists.
Yeah, so my main suggestion about that would be, if you can determine for yourself if you want to go into sort of an alternative research role, maybe more like Julia's doing, or if you want to take your sort of academic like data skills. So if you want to go into like a scholarly role or like a data science role, that's really important, I think, to determine for yourself before you start looking for jobs. And then you need to, like, for example, I'm in much more of like a data role than I would have been as an academic. I think you need to do a bit of an evaluation of what skills you have and how to market those, and then do anything you can to expand upon them before you're on the job market. So for example, like all of the data work I did at Penn State was in Stata. And in both of my roles, both in New York and at the commission, having a broader set of data skills is helpful. So like working in SQL, working in R, knowing a little bit about maybe Python or SAS. I've encountered all of those sort of data languages along the way, and having a strong foundation in Stata was incredibly helpful, but being sort of siloed in that proprietary software, if you can expand out of that, it will definitely be helpful in the market.
We have a
I-
couple.
Oh, I was gonna just add that I think for hard skills, the two main skills that I wish I would have gotten more experience with would be project management and grant writing. I think those are two skills that not a lot of Penn State students get experience in, and they're very useful for the alt-ac market. Now these are skills you're going to develop once you get, you know, a job in this field, but they're really great to have prior to. And I think in terms of soft skills, just, you know, I'm a big believer, if, you know, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And I think just exposure to people who are working in this area, like what are the jobs that are out there? What do these people look like? What does their career track look like? I just, you know, I get it. Like you're kind of in a silo. It's like you're surrounded by other academics. You are at a university. So, I mean, more of stuff like this would be good. Yeah.
And our next two questions follow up on that. One is, do you have suggestions where to look for non-academic jobs? And also, could you speak more about the search timing? And another component is, can you share any sense of specific salary ranges at the early stages and mid stages of a career? It sounds like it must be significantly higher than 70,000.
So I can speak to where Google's a good start. If you just Google keywords on what you can do, like I think I did criminal justice research data jobs, and it usually Indeed or the Workday or Workforce, like there are websites that places post job, LinkedIn, Indeed, I think Workday is the other one. I was able to find, I mean, I found that that's where the NCSC, I think they had theirs, but there are a ton of others that I saw that they do post there. And then what was the second part of that question? Oh, when it's, for at least in my experience, there wasn't really a not like the academic job market is seasonal. I didn't experience, maybe the other two did, any seasonality to the hiring in this sort of research position.
And can you speak to the salary range?
Oh, sure. I think I'm actually gonna take directly. I remember when Matt did this a couple of years ago, Matt Kleinman. I'm gonna take directly from what he said. You're probably gonna start at a higher point than you would if you went academic, but I think the ceiling is higher for academic jobs because of tenure, and you just kind of keep, when you're there long enough, you make enough. I hope I didn't misquote Matt, but I remember that being the general thing. Like, what was the figure? 70,000. That's where I'm starting right now. So that's a starting I guess.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I can add just like a little bit of nuance to that figure. That it's not to say that 70 is low. It's not. Like, you probably will start, many of you will start at 70. I think it's important to really think about not just a figure, but the amount of like work-life balance. Like, what are you doing for that $70,000? Because I remember specifically when I was a graduate student at Penn State and a brand new professor, I went out to lunch with a brand new professor, and he said, you know, casually, he said, I work 10 to 12 hours a day. And like, my thought is that, and I think the starting salary back then was in the low 70s. And like, I'm sorry, but I'm not working 10 to 12 hours a day for $70,000. And I'm not moving to a small town for $70,000, right? Like, that's not going to be my life. So just think that through. Look, like for me, I have 2 kids. So like, I want the flexibility. So I'm willing to take, you know, a slightly smaller salary to have to work from home, to have complete control over what I do. Like, that is the season I'm in my life. And I know you're not like supposed to talk about like your family in academia for some reason, but like, these are all demands that that some of you may have on your life. Right. And so think that through. I will say this, like the big firms like RTI, like they're hiring at close to six figures for new PhDs. So like, if money is what you care about, like you can do that, but don't think of it as just about money. Think about like what you're going to be doing for many hours of your life.
Every position has a trade-off, and you need to make a personal decision, whether it's with your family or your own assessment. Are there other attributes to the quality of your life that you would like to have? You just mentioned location. We have a participant who says, for the academic market, I know that ASC is a good central place to search for jobs. Do you have any other advice on the best places for job openings? I know that Rory mentioned just Google search. Is that how you found yours, Julia?
So my position was posted on the ASC job board, and I actually started as a postdoc and then moved into a permanent position. So I think what Rory said is right on. I think absolutely you can do a lot of search terms, criminal justice, policy work, criminal justice research, things like that, research associate. I will also plug, I am on the OutAct committee for the Division of Corrections and Sentencing. There's about 5 of us. It's a new committee, and they do have a job listserv that you can get on. Let me find the actual email and I will post it in the chat, but that is something we're really trying to make that more public. It's not just for corrections and sentencing. It's for all of criminal justice related research. So join that.
Yeah, I also, I looked through those job boards, but again, I was kind of looking for more broadly data focused jobs. So I had, I think LinkedIn and Workday posting notifications, and I actually just set up one that was keyed to the word Stata, because I figured if I was trying to break into a new field, I would need to break in with something like a skill set I already had. And I was getting lots of posts about that. You know, you get stuff like from Facebook and Google that are like, we're looking for a research scientist that knows how to use this software. I applied for those jobs. Obviously, I'm not in one of those roles. So my first position with New York actually came from essentially like a network, you know, just networking chain. Somebody from the Division of Criminal Justice Services sent a job posting email. It ended up making its way to Tom Loughran. He forwarded it to Derek Krieger, who forwarded it to me, and I applied to that job. So definitely keeping your eyes open for anything that comes through that sort of avenue, or you can sometimes end up on a listserv for sharing job posts like that. But definitely setting up, I would say, posting notifications on any of the big job boards, and then keeping an eye out within your network for roles.
Could I follow up on that? Because I had asked in the beginning what we could better do here. I'm sorry, at Penn State to prepare you for these roles. Could any of you talk a little bit about the difference between an academic job interview and what we prepare you for versus the skills for a like professional government job interview? And is there anything that we could do for practice interviews or set you up better for that process?
So I can't compare it to what an academic job interview is like, but I still had to give a job talk for my position. I still had to present original research. It wasn't an hour long, but I was presenting to a non-academic audience. I was presenting to like people who are used to presenting to stakeholders. So that was, judges or whatever. So that was kind of how I had to change the tone of my job talk to what is normally done in an academic job talk. So I think depending, we all are at least encouraged to do practice job talks, job lined up or not within the department. So I think maybe depending on what type of job that person is going to be seeking, the person who's giving a practice job talk, I don't know, it's not a requirement, but not having it be a academically angled job talk. Like with the difference between presenting how I did versus presenting to, like, I didn't have an equation in my job talk. I didn't talk about residuals or what, it was a lot more about the content and implications of there was no theory talk. It was, so maybe depending on what the person is going to be looking for in a job, having their job talk or allowing for the job talk to not be, I'm not saying it's not allowed now, but encouraging job talks to be aimed at whatever audience you are going to want your job talk to be aimed at.
We're closing in on the hour, and I was just wondering if anybody had any additional items they wanted to add before we end the program.
Yeah, I guess I could say a little bit about my interviews as well and sort of tie in Kelsey's question about skills and experiences. So I had an interview. I didn't give a job talk for any of the interviews I did. I interviewed with the Division of Criminal Justice Services. I interviewed here at PCS. I set an interview for a fellowship research role at Georgetown, which I also didn't get. But that was the people I was interviewing with there were actually lawyers, not criminologists. And that was also a much different sort of interviewing experience than what an academic job talk would be like. And I would say the interviews I had were they were like 30 to 1 hour, 30 minute to 1 hour, much more traditional interviews where they sort of sit down and ask you a battery of questions. And I feel like I was able to answer everything by reaching back into my experience at Penn State and talking about something I've done that I felt met sort of the criteria of the question they were asking. So they'd ask, like, what kind of in-person research experience do you have? Because I think the fellowship was going to be talking to people, much more like on the ground, talking to people doing research that way. And I was able to talk about interviewing experience I had at Penn State, where we went into prisons in the state of Pennsylvania to interview people who were incarcerated. And then they ask you, what kind of research experience you have, and you can talk about the full gambit of research you've done, from formulating a hypothesis, finding data that's appropriate for it, creating your data sets, going through the entire analysis. And you can talk about writing it up for publication. And it just involves sort of massaging your answers to fit a non-academic context. Like, the skills that you develop in grad school are very applicable to other things. It just takes a little bit of sort of reshaping your answers to fit for a non-academic interview.
Megan, did you want to wrap up the session?
Yeah, I just want to first and foremost, thank everyone for their time. I know that you all have busy work days, students and the presenters, so thank you for taking the time out of your day to attend. I hope that this information is helpful. If you have follow-up questions, please feel free to email them to myself or to Joy, and we can see if we can get follow-up answers for you. But again, to Rory and Ted and Julia, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. We really appreciate your time.